say. Okay, so this is the Calf Canyon-Hermit Peak Watershed. Calf Canyon-Hermit Peak community meeting for EWP. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. I've been at it since 4 this morning, so we'll try to get through this all together. I do want to give a chance to recognize some of the co-sponsors for this event. One of them being NRCS. Another would be Western Mora Soil and Water Conservation District, Mora County, and FSA is on with us. And I know some folks from State Forestry are on, and quite a few other organizations. But at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our partners at NRCS for some brief introductions.
All right, thank you, Gerald. My name is Kenneth Branch. I'm the Assistant State Conservationist for Programs with NRCS, located out of Albuquerque, but we're currently working here out of Mora and San Miguel County with the sponsors for EWP, and we'll provide some more information on that. That being said, I'd like to turn it over to Rigoberto Lopez with NRCS.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Rigo Lopez. I'm the Acting State Conservationist, as Kenneth said, for USDA NRCS. I want to thank everybody for attending the meeting. I want to thank Gerald for Tierra and Montes SWCD putting this together and getting folks organized. Western Mora SWCD and the County of Mora. We appreciate you guys being on. Any questions you guys have, please throw them at us and we'll try to answer them as best as we can. Also want to thank our partners that are on, FSA and the rest of the folks. Hopefully we can give you some good information, some good direction where you guys need to go to for some post-fire treatment, healing, and we appreciate everything everybody's doing. Thank you, Kenneth.
All right, Kenneth Alcon.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Kenneth Alcon with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. I'm assisting with this EWP event in Mora and San Miguel counties. The Calf Canyon-Hermit Peak Fire. I'm the assistant. I'm the State Resource Conservationist for NRCS out of our Albuquerque State Office. Thank you.
All right, Gerald, that's pretty much NRCS. We'll turn it back to you for some other intros.
Thank you, NRCS, for that introduction. A lot of people have seen they're only seeing a blank screen. If you want to attach a face to the name, I'm Gerald Romero. We're going to keep our video off as well as most of the presentations go through. There will be a PowerPoint that NRCS puts up in a while that'll be part of the recording and give you more of a visual feel. I'm going to extend the invitation over to anybody from, you know what, I'm going to introduce my staff that's on the call for sure. AJ Lujan is on with us. He's our project facilitator. He's going to be one of the people that you folks are going to be seeing in the field quite a bit with this, along with myself. Lydia, Carla's going to help us primarily in the office. And, taking apps, processing apps, there's been quite a bit. I'm going to now extend the invitation to anybody from Western Mora SWCD that may be on the call to go ahead and introduce yourselves. All right. Anybody on the call from Mora County that would like to introduce themselves? Okay. Do we have anybody from FSA that would like to introduce themselves?
Yes, this is Linda Alcon. I'm the County Executive Director with Farm Service Agency. And also I have Kimberly Quintana that's with me. She's my program technician.
All righty, thank you for that, Linda. And I believe we also have Ms. Atencio from State Forestry. Are you with us?
I'm here. I'm just here to listen so I can answer questions when I refer people to this program.
All righty, thank you, Shannon. All right, so seeing that was our partner's introduction, I did leave one of our board members out, and I definitely want to make sure that we don't do that. Richard Valencia out of Cow Creek is on the call. So believe Wanda has just texted me now, or that she's on. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Wanda? I don't know if she'll be able to, but Wanda is the part of the staff there at Western Mora Soil and Water Conservation District. So anybody out of Mora County that'll be submitting apps for EWP or be engaging in any type of projects through that will actually be dealing directly with Wanda. So thanks for being on the call tonight, Wanda. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our NRCS partners so that they can begin the presentation on what EWP is. And that way, hopefully, any questions that you guys have, put them in the chat and we'll take care of them right after Mr. Branch is done presenting. So this is quite a good presentation, so make sure you take notes on it. And we are going to post this recording later on so that you're able to access this later on. So thank you. Kenny, take it away.
All right, thank you, Gerald. Can you see my screen, Gerald?
Yes.
Okay, awesome, thank you. So I appreciate all the introductions, Gerald. I appreciate the invite from the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. And it's good to be here in these counties. It's unfortunate that we're here during these times and that we have to meet during a natural event, but hopefully our agency can provide some assistance to some of the homeowners and landowners that were affected by this fire that we have going on. So again, we're with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. NRCS is the acronym that we use. Again, we are the federal government, so it seems like acronyms are most common in federal government. So anytime we refer to the NRCS, that is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And the program that I'm going to be referring to or talking about today is the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, or EWP for short. So let me see, it's not changing. There we go. All right. So what is EWP? And I think a lot of folks, this is kind of the big question. And what EWP is it's a program that we offer that helps landowners or individuals to implement recovery measures to relieve imminent hazards to life and property after a natural disaster has come through. And that's going to be one of the key points. And you're going to hear us say this several times throughout this meeting tonight is threat to life and property, because that's one of the caveats to the program. And as we go through this evening, I'll provide you some information on what we can do. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what we cannot do. I want to be fully transparent with everybody and let everybody know that there are limitations. Those limitations are based on the Code of Federal Regulations. So it's not something that we have any control of over here in the state. We're following the Code of Federal Regs when it comes to our basically our limits and whatnot. And so we'll provide a lot of that information. But again, just keep in mind, you're going to hear us say it multiple times of that, threats to life and property. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the eligibility for the program and how landowners can receive some assistance. So basically, private landowners and individuals, the only way that you can receive this assistance is through a project sponsor, okay? And again, the assistance is based on the current condition of the land, that there's that impairment, there's that natural disaster that came through. In this case, we've got the fire that has come through, and there are now threats to life and property. I'll talk a little bit more about the sponsors. This evening, I'd like to focus more on the program itself in the landowner perspective. And then we'll talk a little bit about the sponsors as we move forward and we get going on that. So when we say that it poses a threat to life and property, there's a few things that we need to remember, is that the practices associated with removing the threats can be threats to public health and safety. And we're also trying to restore this, the land, basically the natural environment, to the maximum extent practical after the natural disasters. And so through this program, property as defined as basically any structure that is permanent, artificial, so man-made, and it's permanent. and that can include houses, buildings, roads, utilities, and whatnot. I know a lot of people, they often tell us, well, you guys are the Department of Agriculture. What do you mean that standing orchard crops, growing crops, and other crops are not eligible for EWP? And that's the crazy thing about this program. And even for our staff, it's a little difficult because we have to do a 180, and we kind of go in a different direction here to where we don't work on the traditional ag lands as we know them. We start getting into more areas where there's houses and buildings and roads, and to protect some of those properties. So keep that in mind. We do have some sister agencies, FSA being one of them, that can provide some assistance on standing timber, orchard crops, and whatnot. But I'll let them talk to their programs when we finish up here. The other thing to keep in mind is that the potential threat to life and property, it could be upstream or downstream of the site that we're dealing with. So like with the fires, we know that floods follow fire. So there might be some situations where we can do some work downstream, not necessarily on the burn scar, but off of the burn scar downstream, to protect some life and property down below. And so I'll give some examples as we move forward, but just know that it doesn't have to, the threat doesn't necessarily have to be right there at the site. Now, the other thing I'd like to mention is that our sponsors, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about the sponsors because that's how individuals become eligible and we're able to implement the program is through a sponsor. But sponsors are asking landowners to submit a request for assistance form by July the 24th, 2022. And I'll get into that a little bit more down the road, but just note that July 24th, 2022 is going to be a key date for us in this program. All right. So let's talk about what we can do through the program. I'd like to start off on the right foot, and instead of talking about what we cannot do, let's talk about what we can do through this program. And so when our staff go out, again, like I've said, we're going to mention it several times, we're going to reduce threats to life and property based on that watershed impairment. We're going to be looking at areas to provide protection to soil erosion and runoff. We can remove debris that has been deposited by the natural disaster. And you'll see there that I highlighted deposited by the natural disaster because there are certain situations where there's pre-existing conditions and we cannot work and we cannot implement practices to relieve pre-existing conditions. And one of the big pre-existing conditions that we often see are stock tanks or ponds, as some people know them. We know the runoff is going to come, and we know that these ponds are often in good places to catch some of that runoff. Well, if the pond right now at this point in time is full of sediment, we cannot go and remove that sediment because that sediment was not deposited by that natural disaster. That sediment has been there, and that's more of a maintenance thing on that. So we wouldn't be able to go in and do something like that. So pre-existing conditions is something that we cannot work on, but we can do debris removal that was a cause of the natural disaster. We can restore the hydrologic capacity to the maximum extent practical based on pre-event conditions. So if there's some areas that got plugged up with debris or whatnot, if the fire came down and it threw some trees on some arroyos or some drainages or something, that's something that we can do to increase that capacity. We still have to be economically, socially, and environmentally sound. We're going to have technical standards that our practices that we're going to implement have to meet. So it's not going to be a case where we just go out there and start throwing practices on the ground. We still have some technical standards, and we still have to make sure that we are economically, socially, and environmentally defensible. And then one of the other things that we want to do is we want to look at practices that are least damaging techniques that we do to the land. We want to retain as much of those existing characteristics as we can on that landscape. And so one of the examples I often like to give is contour tree felling, and that's where they'll go throw burned trees on the contours on a side slope to control erosion. We're using that log that's there. Yeah, it's burned, but it's there. It's an existing characteristic of the land, and we don't have to bring in any kind of artificial structure or artificial, anything. We use the trees that are there and kind of use that as some mitigating practices. So we do look at some of those measures that cause the least amount of damage. You'll see here in these pictures, this is some of the work, just to give everybody an example of some of the work that we did up at the U Park fire up near Cimarron. So you'll see the picture, the little picture in the middle shows it's looking downstream, and you'll see that these trees burned in the middle of this drainage. And these were hazard trees. So some of them were cut down by the firefighters, some of them were left standing. But you can see in the background of that middle picture, the top middle picture of the house in the background. So that's the property that it was in danger. And these logs being in the middle of the drainage, as you can see on the bottom picture, the drainage, you can see the logs right in the middle. And so if you look at the top right picture, that's what it looked like after we went in and we removed all of the debris from that area. You will notice in that upper right-hand picture that there's still some junk around there, some old debris that was left behind. The reason we could not remove that is because that's one of those pre-existing conditions. The fire that went through there, it didn't deposit that concrete box that's there, or that other barrel that was there, that trash pile that was there. That was pre-existing, that was not there because of the fire. So we weren't able to remove all of that. The landowner did come in later on and remove it, but we were not able to remove it. We could only remove the parts that were affected by the fire, which is the burned trees that you see in the top and the bottom picture. The picture on the left is an area just upstream from this where we did some wattles. We were implementing some wattles, did some reseeding on this side slope, and did some contour tree fouling in the area also. So that'll kind of give you an idea of some of the practices that we can do in some of these areas. This other picture is a flood that came behind after that fire. This is in the community of Ute Park itself. You could see the big picture right in the middle of your screen. This is just an aerial photograph of a canyon that basically flooded up above the community, and it deposited all this sediment and rocks and whatnot onto the community itself. And so you can see the homes, and they're right in the middle of your screen. There's green roofs. There's two structures. Looks like a house and a shed with the green roof. If you look over on the right picture, the right-hand side, the smaller picture, those green roofs are on the left-hand side there. And so that'll give you an idea of some of the on-the-ground work that we did during this flood, where we went in and we removed all of this sediment that got deposited in these areas. These pictures are just upstream from the last pictures. This was right at the mouth of the canyon that flood. The debris that you see in the top middle picture, that's just right up the canyon a little bit, and you can see all of that deposits that came down. On the right-hand side where the red truck is, that red truck was sitting in front of this garage, sitting in front of the garage that you see there, and it actually got washed down the way and got caught up on some trees. So you can see the force of some of this flood water that's going to come down. On the bottom picture, you can see all of the rock that got deposited that just blew out of this canyon. You can see a flatbed trailer there. That flatbed trailer was attached to that truck. This was across the road from that house. And then on the right-hand side, you can see some of the work that we did. We came in and we removed all of the debris, all of the rock that was there, and we put up some concrete barriers to protect that house, that red roof house that's in the background there, protect that from future events, because we're anticipating some other events coming down that area. So again, that just gives you some ideas. I understand we're dealing with the fire, and I'm giving examples of the flood, but I just, trying to give everybody a picture of what we can do through this program and how we look at life and property through the program. So a little bit more about the eligible sites and how we determine that a site is eligible. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Not every site is going to be eligible for the program. Basically, what we do is NRCS, we go out and we complete an on-site investigation of and we can identify some work necessary to repair or protect a site. And those individual site assessments is what deems eligible sites, basically. That's when we go out and we document what an eligible site is. And you'll note there that, and this is important for us to say this, is that we can only provide funding for the work that's necessary to reduce that threat. If there's an area that we cannot reduce the threat to life and property, we're prohibited from providing that assistance in that area. And believe me, we're going to find those areas. We've already seen some areas. there's some areas that are just the slopes of the canyon walls are so steep and so rocky that there's nothing that we can do in some of those areas to alleviate that threat to life and property. And so if we can't do that, we can't work on it. And that's some of the information that will be passed down during our site assessments. It's unfortunate, but every EWP event that I've worked on in my 20 years that I've been working for this agency, we've always had sites that, it's just one of those where there's nothing that we can do. When our folks are on the ground and we're doing these site assessments, we do have some planning considerations that we do have to keep in mind. So again, we do have to remember that threat to life and property, but we also look for some other measures while we're out there. And it's just the conservation planning part of it. We're looking at construction techniques that with the least amount of adverse impact. That's, we don't want to go out there onto somebody's land and just tear up the land. I mean, there's going to be areas, especially if we need heavy equipment in there or whatnot, that it's going to happen. But we look for some least damaging techniques. Also, when we're out there, we're still keeping in mind our cultural resources. We will have an archaeologist, an NRCS archaeologist on site to review some of those areas for cultural resources. And just know that this information that we have, because we're working on private lands, we don't share this information. It's not something that we put out publicly because we're working on those private lands. The other thing that we have to do is we do have to complete a NEPA assessment, and we have to make sure that we're still following all of the local, state, tribal, and federal laws. And when I say NEPA, I know a lot of people, when they hear NEPA, they kind of cringe. Our NEPA is expedited. And when I mean expedited, it's really expedited. It is not the normal NEPA documents that you find that are just pages and pages and pages. Ours is it's really condensed version of NEPA that we're allowed to go through. It's an approved type of NEPA that we're able to do. And so we definitely do our environmental evaluations as well. Again, we want to use the least damaging practical techniques that retain those existing characteristics as possible. Contour tree felling was an example I gave earlier. And like I mentioned before, we still have to be technically sound. We have to make sure that we're meeting standards and specifications, designs, surveys, designs. We have to make sure that we're meeting all of that. And then we also do look for alternative solutions. We don't just automatically come in and say, this is exactly what we're going to do. The alternatives could be structural, non-structural, bioengineering. A perfect example of some bioengineering is reseeding. We always look for opportunities to reseed areas to control erosion. But there might be other instances where we do need those structural practices. And then, of course, there's always floodplain easements. In this case, we don't see a lot of floodplain easements because that entails, the landowner actually selling an easement to the federal government. And usually in an easement, a floodplain easement, we want to go and remove everything off the site, the houses, the buildings, everything there. Those are generally for areas that continuously flood. And of course, in New Mexico, we haven't really had to use the floodplain easement part of it. All right, so let's jump into some limitations. Like I said, we're going to have limitations. It's unfortunate. Every agency is going to have these. But again, I want to be transparent with everybody, and I want to let you know up front that there's some stuff that we cannot do. And of course, the first one is we cannot provide assistance on any federal lands. That includes federal aided highways. So our programs are designed to help private landowners, and we can also work on state land. So as long as it's not federal land, you're good to go with our program. We're not going to provide assistance more than twice in a 10-year period. In these areas over here, we don't really need to worry about that because we have not implemented EWP in these areas in the last 10 years, so we're still good there. This next one, not a real big one, dispose of animal carcasses. We do have one exception if it's creating some issues with debris and runoff. Haven't really seen, since we've been on the grounds, haven't seen or heard of a lot of animal carcasses out there, burned animal carcasses, of course. And then the last one there is last one on this page anyway, is we cannot perform any operation and maintenance to any one area. And, any kind of periodic or routine work that was necessary to maintain any practice that's in place, we can't do that. And a couple of examples, and I gave one of the examples earlier, is, we're not going to go remove sediment from ponds that's already there. That would be considered an operation and maintenance or routine or periodic work that needed to happen. And then the other example I like to give is, we're not going to remove live trees from a drainage. So if we see a drainage out there and we know that the water is going to come through and flow through that drainage, and it's full of Chinese elm trees that are alive and were not burned, was not affected by the fire, we cannot go in and remove those live trees, because that's maintenance of that drainage. That's periodic or routine work that would need to happen. Now, trees that burned, like I gave you that example in Ute Park, those trees burned and were a direct effect of the fire, we would be able to go in and remove some of that debris, because that was, that's caused by the event. Okay, some other limitations that we have: we're not going to solve natural problems that existed prior to this disaster. And one of the biggest examples that we always get is if there's gully erosion on the land that was there prior to this event, we're not going to go and implement measures to prevent that gully erosion. We know that it's probably going to flow and that erosion could get worse, but again, it's something that was pre-existing. That arroyo had already formed on the land, and so we can't go back in and do this. We're looking at just mitigating the effects of the natural disaster. The next one is repair, rebuild, or maintain public or private transportation facilities. So we can't go work on roads or bridges or culverts or any of that stuff. We can protect a road or a bridge or a culvert, but we cannot work on a road or a bridge or a culvert. So right now with the fire, I didn't see a lot of damage to a lot of roads, but just later on, if we start getting some floods and a flood blows out a road because there's a culvert that's too small, we can't come back and fix that road. We could just try and help protect the road for the future. The next thing is we cannot increase the pre-disaster capacity of a channel by constructing a new channel, enlarging an old channel, or relocating the stream. And so this one is important because a lot of folks we've already looked at, a lot of areas that we've already looked at say, well, all of this water is going to come down, into this stream right here. Can't we move this stream, or can't we divert the stream to flow in a different area to try and get it to slow down the water? Yeah, and even though some of those are good examples, we can't relocate that stream. We can't divert it off of the natural flow that it has, the natural path that it's taking. We can divert water or deflect water to go back into these streams, divert it away from homes or buildings or whatnot. But we're not going to relocate, and we're not going to be moving or enlarging any channels that are there. The next limitation that we have is we're not going to do any of these practices for landscaping purposes or just aesthetics. A lot of folks have already come to us and they said, I don't want those burnt trees on my property. They look ugly, they're burned, they're black. I just want them gone. We're not going to be able to come in and remove those burned trees just because they look bad. There are other instances where we could remove some trees if we're doing some reseeding and mastication, where we'll masticate some of the trees, but we use that masticated material as mulch. So we're using it for other purposes. It's not just for aesthetics. So remember that we're not going to do anything for landscaping purposes or aesthetics. The next one is of course, we're not going to drill or modify any wells, pipelines, any kind of irrigation equipment, any portable equipment. We're not going to come in and repair or replace any of that stuff. That's would be something that FSA might be able to help with, and they'll talk about their programs. And speaking of FSA programs, they do have what they call the Emergency Conservation Program, and they'll talk about that here in a little bit. But any measure that's eligible for ECP would not be eligible for EWP. So keep that in mind. Also, and I don't have it on here, but if FEMA is going to come in with some kind of measure, we would not be able to double dip on that. So we can't have two federal agencies, FEMA and NRCS, doing the same work. So we have to make sure that we draw that line as to what FEMA can do and what NRCS can do. And then the other thing that we're going to do is we're not going to be able to contract any non-structural management practices like tilling, if you're going to go out there and you want to till your soil, or if you want to implement prescribed grazing now that it burned or whatnot, we're not going to be able to pay through that. We do have other programs through NRCS that I'm not going to get into right now, such as our environmental quality incentive program that might be able to help with prescribed grazing or some of those other practices. But through this program, through the EWP, just know we're not going to be able to do that. Okay, moving on. I told you I was going to talk a little bit about the sponsor. So just to give you a little in-depth, a little bit of information about the sponsor. So the sponsor has to be a state agency, a legal subdivision of the state government, or a local unit of government, a Native American tribe, or a tribal organization. So those are the only entities that are eligible to be a sponsor. So nonprofits, not eligible to be sponsors. If there's any other kind of groups or private entities, not eligible to be sponsors. It has to be one of those state agencies, legal subdivision, and everything that you see there on the screen. The project sponsor has a lot of responsibilities. We've already been in constant communication with the sponsors, but I just want to point out a few of the major responsibilities that they have. So the project sponsor has to have that legal interest or the responsibility for the areas threatened. That's why some of your nonprofits and your LLCs and whatnot are not eligible, because they don't have that legal interest or that responsibility for these areas like a county would or a state. They have to be capable of obtaining the necessary land rights and any kind of required permits. And this is important because we're working on private lands. And so we will not go on anybody's property without their permission. And that's why we're asking folks to step up and submit these requests for assistance. And I'll talk about that just in a little bit, but that's one of the main reasons why we're not going to go onto somebody's private land without them knowing and us having the permission. And then also, if we're going to implement any practice on private land, that landowner is going to have to give the sponsor the permission to do that. We're not just going to go on there and take eminent domain and just start doing all of this work. The landowners need to buy in on all of this. The sponsor has to be capable, and they have to perform the operation and maintenance of any of the practices that we install. And this is where the sponsor really asks the landowner, and we've seen this in the past, where the sponsors really rely on the landowners to help them with some of that operation and maintenance. So if it could be, for example, if we installed a diversion to divert water away from somebody's home, oftentimes the sponsor will tell that landowner, hey, you need to help us. We're asking you to help us with maybe yearly inspections of that diversion to make sure that it's still in place and it's still functioning and whatnot. So keep that in mind, that it's going to take an effort between all of us. It's not just going to be one landowner or one sponsor. We need to work on this together. We're going to be at it for a couple of years. The rehab on this fire is not going to happen in 4 months. This is going to be, a 4 or 5 year, process, even though, this funding, obviously we're trying to get it on the ground as soon as we can, but the rehab itself, it's going to take time. So it's going to take a community effort to get this done. The other responsibility or major responsibility that the sponsor has is to administer the contracting when it's part of the local agreement. And so that contracting is the contracting between the federal government and the sponsor, between the sponsor and the landowners, hiring contractors to do some of this work, whether it be the landowner themselves or bringing in another contractor to do the work. So all of that administering this program is something that these sponsors have to do, and they don't get reimbursed for that. That's something that they have to be able to come in and do on their own, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple minutes. And then the last one, and probably one of the biggest one, is that the sponsor is responsible for matching funds for construction, and it can be cash or in kind, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but just remember that this is going to take money. It's going to take in kind, and the sponsor is on the hook for some of that. I already talked about a cooperative agreement that would have to be signed. That's part of the administration part of it. One of the things that I want to note out, I know a lot of people are anxious. They want to implement practices. They want to get going on this. From our program, we cannot reimburse the sponsor or any landowner for any work that was performed before an agreement is signed between us and the sponsor. So there is a little bit of patience that needs to come into play here. We're trying to meet with all of the landowners. That's going to be a tall task for us because a lot of folks have already stepped forward. We anticipate more folks coming forward, and we don't want to leave anybody out, but we're trying to do that work as fast as we can. But just remember that anything that is completed prior to us entering into an agreement with the sponsor cannot be reimbursed. Talking a little bit about the funds. So like I mentioned earlier, the matching funds that the sponsor has to come in with, they can be cash, they can be in kind, or it can be a combination of cash and in kind. The match for this program is usually a 75-25% split, and that would be 75% to the NRCS and 25% to the sponsor. In this case, we understand the situation. We understand that there's some limited resource areas, limited resources in these counties. And so we have a waiver for Mora, San Miguel, and Colfax County for all the fires in the spring of 2022, that match be a 90-10 split. So 90% to the NRCS and a 10% to the sponsor. And I will tell you that the sponsors are really going to be looking and really need landowners' help to meet that 10%. You know, if there's some landowners out there that are willing and able and capable of implementing a practice, the work that you do to implement those practices that are part of our program, that are approved projects through our program, the work that you do can be part of that in-kind match for the sponsor. And so just to give you an example, if we're going to reseed an area and the landowner says, hey, you know, I can go out there and spread that seed. I can go reseed my own property. You know, the sponsor gives them the seed, the landowner goes out there and does the labor and actually implements the practice and reseeds it. All those hours that you spend doing that, that's the match. You know, and as we move forward and as we get into that phase, the sponsors ourselves will have those communications with the landowners to say, okay, this is what we can do on your land. When we get the funding for it, we'll come back, we'll talk to you about it. And if it's something that you're willing to do as part of the match, then great, we'll move forward with it and we'll talk more about it at that time. But just know that it's going to be important that, you know, for the funding to go as far as it can, you know, we're going to need some help from the community and from the landowners to implement some of these practices and to be able to be part of that 10% in-kind match. We've actually had some folks here in Mora County that have stepped forward and said, I'm willing to put up some of my own money towards the match. And they're willing to do the work on their own property and put funding up for other properties to help with that. And so that's pretty big and it's pretty admirable of the county, and it just shows the way that northern New Mexico is. You know, I grew up in northern New Mexico myself, grew up in Mora, and so I know how the community is, and it just shows just what kind of people we are and what we're willing to do to help each other out and to get this work done and to get this rehab done. All right, so I want to talk about the process. You know, a lot of people, you know, want to know where we are, what are we doing, and there's a process to everything. So I've kind of talked what the program is, what we can and can't do. Let's talk about how we go about this. And so the first thing that it's important to understand is that right now, NRCS, we don't have that money in state. We have to request the funding from our national headquarters. Our funding requests are based on the availability of funds, so it's not automatically funded, and it's usually on a first come, first served basis. And when I say first come, first served basis, I don't mean by landowner in Mora County. I mean by the 50 states that are requesting EWP funds to our national headquarters. Our national headquarters has a pot of money sitting at headquarters, and as the requests come in for this program from all these states, everybody's kind of dipping their hand in that cookie jar. And so we need to make sure that we get our request in there. And we've got to do those assessments that I talked about before we can do that. And I'll talk about those steps here in the next couple of minutes. The one good thing here is that we've been informed that there's funding available right now. It's still early in the year to where a lot of states haven't had the natural disasters that we're having. You know, hurricane season hasn't hit yet. And so there's still some of those funds available. So hopefully we'll be able to get on that list before the funds run out. So you're going to see 5 steps on the right-hand side of the screen. And we have to follow all of these steps. All of these steps have to be completed before NRCS can request our funds to our national headquarters. The first step is to conduct a rapid survey to ensure that EWP is even possible in the area. We've already completed that. We've already said, yes, it is. The second step is to basically complete what we call an electronic disaster report. And that's basically notifying our national headquarters that, hey, there was a natural disaster in New Mexico that's eligible for EWP. Get ready, because we're going to be making a request for funding. So we kind of put them on alert. We've already done that. Eligible sponsors have 60 days to make a request to NRCS. We have several requests from several sponsors, so that step is already done. And so basically where we are right now is we're on step number 4. And our policies and the Code of Federal Regulations allows NRCS 60 days from the date that the sponsor makes the request for us to do our assessments. We call them damage survey reports, but really what it is it's an on-site assessment to see the eligible site. So we do the site visits. We come up with estimated costs, estimated practices, estimated quantities. We do our environmental evaluations. We make sure we have the justifications that I talked about during a lot of that. And then, we have to go through that step, and it's going to take some time because we don't want to leave anybody out. We are going to be able to prioritize the areas that we work in first. We have some hydrologists working on some debris flow models and whatnot, and that'll tell our staff, our teams, where some of the critical areas are. But we don't want to prioritize anyone's property over somebody else's when it comes to funding. We'd like to fund all of the eligible practices that we identify. So in order to do that, we got to get out there. We've got to meet with the folks. We got to do our on-site assessments. Myself, Kenneth Alcon, Rigoberto, our acting state conservationist, we're all of the opinion that we don't need to be making these decisions from a desk in Albuquerque. We need to be on the ground doing this. And in order for us to do this, we're going to have 3 teams working in each separate sections of the fire. We're going to have a north team, a central team, and a middle team. And we'll talk about those teams here in the next couple of slides. But, we're allocating the resources to this to get out there on the ground and to be able to get this work done as fast as we can. We know that we're on the clock. We know we're racing against monsoons. And, I can't guarantee you anything. The only thing I can guarantee you is that NRCS is going to work as hard as we can to get this done as fast as we can. We want to do it correctly. And we're not going to leave anybody that requests the assistance, that submits one of those requests for assistance form, will at least conduct that site visit to see if there's any eligible practices that can be done. I can't guarantee that there will be, because remember, we have our limitations. I've already mentioned a few about real steep slopes and real rocky areas and whatnot, but we'll have our teams on site. So once we complete step number 4, then that's when we get to the 5th step where we can actually submit the request to NHQ for funding. We want to make sure that our sponsors are capable of their 10% at whatever estimated cost we come out at. And then once we have those conversations, we make the request to headquarters for the funding. So I'm gonna turn it over to Kenneth Alcon. He's with us with NRCS. He introduced himself. He's going to talk a little bit about the NRCS teams. He's another Mora person, Mora boy, and he knows a lot of the area. So he's going to be able to talk about the area. So Ken, I'll turn it over to you to discuss this slide.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Branch. So yes, like Kenny said, we have broken up this fire into 3 teams. We have a north team, we have a central team, and we have a south team. As you can see, in the north team, we have a team leader for each of those teams. These are experienced people, for the most part, that have had EWP experience in previous events. In the north team, we have Travis Vigil. Travis Vigil is the lead planner for NRCS out of our Mora field office. Then for the central team, we have Chambliss Lantana. He's out of actually the Aztec field office out of team 1, and he's also a lead planner for that team. And then we also have Josh Archuleta in the south team, and he is out of the team out of Estancia. So those are the team leaders. And then within those teams, we also have a range management specialist that will be assigned to those teams, and either a engineer and or a engineering technician that will go out with these teams to help do those assessments on the property. Like Kenny said, one thing that I'd like to stress on this is that this is to protect life and property. This is not a rehab program. We have other programs that can deal with rehabilitation. This one is really geared to protect life and property. Another thing that I've been trying to tell folks is that this is going to be a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint. It's going to take a long time for these watersheds to flush out. I'm looking at anywhere from 3 to 5 years for these watersheds to stabilize before things start healing as part of the process that Mother Nature is going to go through. So just so you all kind of get familiar, I know it's kind of hard to see on the map, but the south team is pretty much going to cover the area from Sapeo, and if you go on that Las Tusas road, basically out towards Las Tusas, and you go all the way up to Surprise Valley, up towards like Lone Pine Mesa, everything south of that area is going to be in that south team. So Josh Archuleta and his team will be taking care of the site assessments for that. And then in the central team, we have Chambliss Santana as the team leader, and they'll be going north of that Las Tusas road, and then they will be going all the way up to Highway 518, where it goes off from La Cueva going up towards Mora, and then it'll go up Highway 94, which for those of us that are from the areas, it's La Cuesta that we call it, and they're pretty much going to be covering everything on that ridge, and then it'll be going out towards the Sawyer place where it hits the National Forest. So that's going to be it's going to be the central team. Then everything else above that 518 is going. Then everything else above that 518 is going to be the north team, which is going to be Travis Vigil and his team, and they'll be covering everything up towards Gualupita, Chacon, all of the Holman area, Tramperos. Those are the areas that north team will be taking care of as far as that goes. That's pretty much what the team concept that we have going through these. If anybody has questions down the road, you know, the team leaders are the ones that are dictating the day-to-day activities with those teams and making sure that we don't miss, like Mr. Branch said earlier, that we don't miss folks being out there that want to apply for our program. So it's very important that you put in those requests in, like Kenny said, so we have permission to be out there on people's individual property, because it is private property and it is a volunteer program as far as that goes. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Branch. I know there was some questions coming in through the chat, so we'll answer those at the end of the presentation.
All right, thanks, Ken. So moving on, let's talk about the process after we get funded. It says if there, I'm going to say when. I'm going to be optimistic and say when we get funded for this project. So the first 5 steps that I talked about were the process that has to happen before we request funding. Now let's talk about what happens after we get funding. So once we receive the funds in the state, the NRCS will enter into a project agreement with the sponsor, and I'll talk about who the sponsors are in just a bit. At that point in time, from the NRCS standpoint, we will begin survey and design, and we'll be responsible, the NRCS will be responsible for all of the survey and the design. And then also, I don't have it up there, but the project sponsor will start reaching out to all of the landowners that have eligible practices that are going to be funded and start entering into agreements between the sponsor and the landowner. That's so the landowner doesn't contract with the federal government in this case. The landowner actually enters into an agreement with the sponsor. And us as the federal government, we're more of the technical part of the program, and then 90% of the funding would come from us. But the sponsor and the landowner would be the ones to work together to come up with that agreement for the work that we deem eligible and necessary. Once we get the projects, the designs, the surveys, the designs, and the sponsor has all of the agreements in place, then basically we start looking for contractors. The sponsor will hire contractors. Again, It could be the landowner, it could be other contractors. All of the sponsors have already made it very clear that they want to keep some of the work, or the majority of the work, local, as much of the work as we can to local folks. We know that this fire has economically impacted these areas, and so we want to keep the work local. It doesn't mean that we have to, but that's going to be the try. So just know that the sponsors will be working on that as hard as they can to get that in place. Once they hire a contractor, the contractor can begin the work. And then while we're doing the work, NRCS can oftentimes have some folks on site just to make sure that the contractor is implementing it correctly according to the design, according to the standards and specs. We won't have somebody on site all of the time, but if a contractor or a landowner says, hey, I want to make sure I'm doing this right, can you come out and take a look? We can have some folks on site to do that. Also, when it comes to hiring contractors, the sponsors have to follow their procurement rules when it comes to hiring. And so there might be a certain dollar amount that if a project is going to exceed a certain dollar amount, they have to go out with an RFP for it. That would be up to the sponsor to make sure they're following their procurement rules. If contractors have to be licensed and bonded or whatnot, again, that's going to be based on the procurement rules that are in place for that sponsor. And I'm not sure what those are. That would be a question for the local sponsors, or even somebody with the state that can probably talk more about that. Okay, so once the work is completed, we will go out and the NRCS will complete a review or a checkout, like we like to call it. And if the work is deemed complete and it's met the standard and specification, it was installed according to the design, then we can move forward to the payment. And the way that the payment works is that the sponsor will complete, what we call an SF-270. They'll have to show all of their match for the projects. And then they submit that over to NRCS, and then NRCS pays the sponsor, who then will turn around and pay the contractor. So we keep our 90%, the NRCS keeps our 90% of the money until it's time to pay out the projects that are done, that are completed. Once they're completed, then we funnel that money, we pay the sponsor, and then the sponsor turns around and they pay the contractor. So that's kind of the process after we're funded and when we're in the construction phase, and that's kind of down the road. But again, just to give everybody some information on what the process is like. So just to sum it up, we have to do our EDS, we have to do our DSRs, which is our assessments. Prior to any work, the NRCS and the local sponsor would have to complete that agreement. The sponsor will obtain those necessary land rights and permits. And like I said, they'll make sure that they get into some kind of agreement. NRCS completes the survey, the design, the cultural clearances, the NEPA, all of that good stuff. The sponsor follows their procurement laws for selecting contractors. The projects will commence. When the projects are completed, NRCS will do that final checkout. And then the sponsor can request that payment, of course, up to the 90%. And then they pay the contractor. And basically all of the projects must be completed within 220 days from the day that we receive the funds in the state. We don't like to and don't want to take the 220 days, but the federal regulations allow for 220 days to complete the work. So just a quick sum. I like to just show some other what I call success stories in the state. This kind of shows that there is some hope behind some of these natural disasters. It shows that some of these watersheds, they'll heal, and we'll help them heal. And here's an example of some work that we did on the Doghead Fire over in the East Mountains. You can see on the left-hand side what it looked like after the burn. This is above the little village of Chilali. So that's the life and property that we were talking about. Remember, that property can be upstream or downstream. In this case, we were working on the upper reaches of the watershed. All of this had kind of nuked in this area. And we came behind and we did some contour tree felling and some reseeding, and you can see the response that we had. On the lower left, the lower right, you can see the logs there with the grass growing behind the logs and some of the sediment that it was catching. And then on the upper picture, you can see that you can see kind of a road behind the logs there, and that's not a road, that was actually a pipeline corridor. New Star has a pipeline that goes from Amarillo to Albuquerque that delivers jet fuel, diesel fuel and whatnot, and it went right through that area. So that was one of the areas, that corridor was what we were trying to protect. And you can see that we got some regrowth of grasses and whatnot in that area to protect that, that pipeline and those houses downstream. This is a diversion that we did on the Ute Park fire over on in Cimarron. And so you can see on the picture on the left was taken from that cabin that you see in the background there. And the other two pictures, you see that cabin. I took that picture looking upstream of there, and you can see that that watershed totally burned above this cabin. And then on the lower right-hand side, you can see looking from the watershed down towards the cabin. And you could also see that we had a little rain that went through there, and you can see that that ash and that sediment was moving right towards that cabin. And so we built that diversion that you see in the picture with the white pickup in it. We built a diversion in front of that cabin to protect that cabin from being inundated with debris and sediment that was going to come off of that hillside. And so that was right after it was completed. This picture here shows after the first rainstorm, how much sediment that diversion actually diverted around. And it's, you know, we didn't turn the river, we just diverted the water, deflected the water away from the house there. And once that water gets around the house, then it'll flow back into the river. But we did catch all that sediment there. You can see there was another house there on the upper reaches where we kind of diverted the water and the sediment between the two houses, the two structures there. Without that diversion, all of that sediment would have probably just totally inundated that cabin there, and it would have probably been under a couple feet of mud and muck and whatever else, ash that came down. So those are some of the practices that we look at when we're out here, and these are some of the successes that we've had. This is a picture of some of the areas that we masticated and reseeded. You can see some of the growth that we have out there. That area just looked like a golf course after we were done with it. It looked really nice. We planted some oats and then some other native perennial grasses, and then they got some nice rains that came in after we did this work, and we had oats up to our knees probably before we even finished with the remainder of the projects. So you can see there that we didn't masticate the entire area because, again, you know, the slopes, the rock that were in some of those other areas prohibited us from doing the work in there because we weren't going to be able to do anything in those areas. So we kind of had to pick some critical areas and some areas that lent themselves to the work that could be done, and this was something that we were able to do. So we got a great response there in Cimarron, and I've actually talked to the Philmont Scout Ranch where a lot of this work was being done, and they've told us that all of the practices since we left there in 2019, all of those practices have just performed well, and they're getting a great response back from that fire. So that's good to know. It's up here in northern New Mexico, so there is some hope, you know, just looking at what we have done in the past. So I mentioned earlier, I've mentioned a couple times that the sponsors are asking landowners to fill out a sponsor request for assistance form. And this is basically what the form looks like. It's just a one-pager. On the left-hand side is the form, we're calling it the green form because you can see the green up here. That green form is the form for the Tierra y Montes Soil and Water Conservation District. So basically they're in San Miguel County. So it would be anybody that's in the southern team, and folks that are on the south half of the central team would be going to the Tierra y Montes Soil and Water Conservation District. So basically anybody in San Miguel County. And then the right-hand side of the screen there, which is the blue form or the yellow form, is the Western Mora Soil and Water Conservation District's request for assistance form. So anybody in Mora County would essentially be going to their office and completing this form and submitting it to them. The form has the email address on the bottom of where to submit it. It has the deadline on there, June the 24th. This form has been posted, the Mora County has posted it on their website. You can pull it from there. You can email that same email address, Western Mora or Tierra y Montes, and they can send you an email version of it. If you need them to drop it in the mail, I'm sure they'd be happy to drop it in the mail. You can return it in person. You can turn it in by emailing it. And then essentially what they're doing is they're getting those request forms, they're logging it into their book, and then they're forwarding it over to NRCS so we can start contacting the landowners. So it's important that the form is filled out completely, that you sign it, and that you give us a valid phone number and a valid email address for us to meet you, because that's how we're going to contact you. We're going to call you to try and schedule some site visits, schedule some times, and so we need that information to be as accurate as possible. The sponsors, just to talk a little bit about them. So in San Miguel County, the county itself, San Miguel County, has stepped up and said that they would like to be a sponsor. The Tierra y Montes Soil and Water Conservation District is going to be a sponsor as well. Gerald and his staff have been very active throughout this process. So, you know, they're the ones that put this meeting together along with Western Mora. So we appreciate Gerald and his staff for stepping up. And again, we give some more information there in terms of the application deadlines and where to submit it. In Mora County, the county itself, Mora County, wants to be the sponsor. And then the Western Mora Soil and Water Conservation District has also stepped up and willing to be a sponsor. And so I just want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors out there. You know, what you guys are doing for these landowners in this area is just incredible. Stepping up, wanting to take on those roles and responsibility as the sponsor is it just speaks volumes for what you guys are going to do and what you're willing to do for these communities. So, you know, a big shout out to you guys. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm getting a lot of feedback, so if you don't mind muting your line, hearing a lot of feedback out there. Moving on, there's also some other potential sponsors. The city of Las Vegas, they've already told us that if they cannot actually sponsor it, that they will co-sponsor some of the projects that they can. So city of Las Vegas has stepped up and wanted to do a lot of that work. And then Taos County and Taos Soil and Water Conservation District are other potential sponsors, because this fire has moved into Taos County, but we're waiting on that a little bit to see where we are with Taos County. Again, if you'll mute your line, I'm getting a lot of feedback, and I know a lot of folks are really wanting to hear this information, so please mute your line. All right, I know I say questions on the screen. I see there's a lot of questions in the chat. I'll try and answer all of those questions at the end after all the other presenters have been able to share their information, but I appreciate the time. I look forward to working with everybody. Again, it's unfortunate that we're going to have to meet under these circumstances, but our teams are out there. We're trying. We're gonna try and do as much as we can. You know, we won't solve all of the problems that this fire created, but hopefully we can help. We can be a piece of that pie, a piece of that puzzle to get this complete. That being said, Gerald, I'll turn it back over to you, bud.
All right, Kenny, thank you for that presentation. And I think probably what we'll do is what we did last time is go ahead and start fielding those questions as they relate directly to the EWP program. Now that I have access to my screen again, I was able to mute a couple of feedback that were coming through. So Mr. Alcon, if you want to help me out with this chat portion too, if you catch something I missed on the way down, I'm going to scroll back to the top and we'll just read them off, and you folks can answer them as they come through. If there's anything that's fielded, you know, that the office can go ahead and address directly, I'll go ahead and do that. So what does NRCS stand for? So that was taken care of. So does EWP include septic and wells?
So no, the EWP does not include septic, because our environmental evaluations do not cover any kind of potential hazardous materials or any kind of chemicals that could be in septic or whatnot. And then wells is, we can protect a well head or something like that, but we won't be able to go in and re-drill a well or look for water quality or anything like that in a well. FSA might be able to help with a well if it burned or something, you know, but we have some limitations on the wells that we can do, and it's mostly protecting them.
Okay, so I just wanted to make a correction. I'm gonna call you out, Kenny. Just kidding, but I know in your presentation, you had mentioned that the deadline was July 24th. The actual deadline is June 24th. I know it was a slight, you know, what it was, but I'm here to correct that. It is June 24th for sponsors in both counties to accept applications. So we encourage you folks to get those in sooner rather than later. There's teams on the ground assessing already, And if we can get applications together in communities where they can hit one community in one day, that works out better instead of having to send them through, different parts of the county throughout the day. So, here's another one. What about removing existing logs and debris in the river floodplain that will impede water flow? So this was, I know, was posed at the time you were talking about what can't be removed, if it was something that was pre-existing, Kenny?
Yeah, Gerald, you're absolutely right. And I covered it during the presentation, but again, if it was not a cause of the fire, like if it didn't, if those trees in there didn't burn and, they're just live trees, or there were logs that have been in the river for that, before the fire, then yeah, we would not be able to go in and remove them.
Alrighty, the next question, if the deadline is June 24th, what happens with rain that floods in July causing problems?
So in that case, right now, again, the project is towards the natural disaster that has happened, which is the fire. If we do have a flood that floods a certain canyon or a certain watershed, we could essentially go back and request different funding using the same program, but different funding for the flood in that specific area. It would be two different events. We would have funding for the fire in all of the other areas, and then we could get funding for the flood in that specific area. And just to give you an example, that did happen in when we were working on the Ute Park fire. The community of Ute Park flooded, which are those pictures that I showed you. So we did the work on the fire. We continued those efforts, but then we also came back and did some work and received some separate money to work in the area where the floods were. So that's how we would handle that situation.
Thank you for that, Kenny. The next one was already addressed. It was regarding the NEPA and how long that takes, but you did an excellent job in the presentation, pinpointing how that's a more expedited process. So how are pre-existing conditions determined? What pre-disturbance documentation is necessary to identify them?
So our staff will be out there. When we're out there on the ground, we'll look at those areas to see if it's pre-existing or not. I know that sometimes you look at it and say, well, that might be hard, but with the fire, it's, you can see the burned trees, you can see the areas that the fire affected and those kind of things. So that would be determined during those site-by-site evaluations that NRCS would do.
And I think one of the things that helps people maybe clarify this, Kenny, is that when you talked about a pre-existing gully, you can treat things that may enter the gully, but they can't treat the head cut in the gully that was already there. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, that's absolutely a great explanation of it. We can keep debris from entering into the gully, but we wouldn't be able to go in and put, a diversion in the gully to mitigate that erosion that happened because that gully was there pre-existing.
Okay, so the next one is, what if we do not know the condition of our damage yet? And the answer to that question is that the team is actually here to help you know the extent of your damage and what can be done about that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then another question is, you had mentioned in your presentation about not being able to use double federal funding sources and agencies for work. The question is, what if FEMA is cleaning up a burnt structure? Will that disallow the landowner from engaging in EWP?
So yeah, so the burnt structures, NRCS, we're not going to go and clean up houses that burned because it goes back to our environmental evaluation. There's freezers, refrigerators that could have Freon in them, and those chemicals are not part of our environmental evaluation. They don't fall under our NEPA, so we can't work on that site. So any kind of house that burnt or structure, we generally can't go in and clean that up. So if FEMA is working on it, FEMA can definitely do it, but it does not disqualify you from our program. There might be some other projects that we can do on that land. And so I just recommend you fill out that request form and let our team go out there and take a look.
Okay, thank you for that, Kenny. So the next question, what about mutual domestics being able to participate in EWP? So I'm assuming these are the mutual domestic water associations?
Yeah, I would probably need a little bit more information on what they're talking about in terms of mutual domestics. If they are, mutual domestic water associations, they can't be a sponsor, but the land that they're responsible for is as long as it's not federal land, we can go look at those areas, municipal water sources, protecting some of those. We're already looking at the Gainas watershed, for example. So if that's what you're talking about mutual domestics, then that's what it would amount to, is that, yeah, we can still take a look at it. But if that's not what you're meaning, if you'll, Sharon Stewart, if you'd please maybe either unmute yourself and explain, or just put it in the chat and we can hopefully get to it later on.
Okay, so the next one, can a county commissioner be a sponsor? Who pays the cash split? Where do the funds come from? So I'll let you take a stab at that, Kenny, and then I'll let them know what I know.
Okay. Well, the county commissioner themselves are not the sponsors. Remember, it's got to be the county as a whole, a legal subdivision, like a soil and water conservation district. So any one individual is not a sponsor. It's that entity that's the sponsor. As far as the split, when I went through the sponsors' roles and responsibilities, the split is 90-10 between NRCS and the sponsor. We talked about who the sponsors were. So that's where that would come from. And as far as where the funds are coming from, our program, the only stipulation we have is that you cannot match federal funds with other federal funds. Other than that, it would be up to the sponsor to ensure that whatever cash they have, wherever it comes from, that it can be matched towards a federal program. That's the responsibility of the sponsor, is to make sure that. So where those funds come from, I couldn't tell you, but I just know that it can't be other federal sources. So I don't know, Gerald, if you want to talk a little bit more on that.
I will, so as far as the district is concerned, Tierra and Montes, some of that funding will potentially come from internal funding. Some of it's going to have to be sought somewhere else, and when Kenny talked earlier about, asking our landowners to have a vested interest in the projects that are going to be implemented on their property, through you folks actually being able to do some of that work, you're helping the sponsor. Because we as SWCDs are smaller organizations, we have limited staff, we have limited resources. So we're being tasked with the largest fire disaster probably in New Mexico history. And we're going to need people's help to get that done. This isn't something that we tackle normally every day. So we're going to definitely ask who we can. Another cool thing is Kenny mentioned earlier that nonprofits cannot be a sponsor. But if you are a nonprofit, or a nonprofit that has the ability to raise money, the soil and water districts actually, through the state statute, can accept donations. So if there's entities or individuals out there that want to donate money that can be used as that in-kind or cash match, we are set up to where we can accept that and put that towards that in-kind match. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so there's a couple of questions here regarding the team numbers and all that. That was answered in a couple of things here. So team members, yes.
Let me just touch a little bit more on the team members. So even though we've only got 3 members per team in the north, the central, and the south, we've got some other folks that are dedicated to working on this fire. Myself, Kenneth Alcon, we're going to be around the entire time helping these teams out, overseeing all of the operations for all of the teams. We've got our West National Technical Center forester coming from Denver, Colorado, to assist with these efforts. I've got hydrologists in Baltimore, Maryland, and in Portland, Oregon, working on some hydrology models. And we're hoping to bring those engineers to the state so they can come and get some on the ground looks at what's going on. So when they do their modeling and help us with some of the debris flows and whatnot, they'll be here also. So just those 3 team members may be the only ones that folks are seeing, but just know that we have other folks dedicated in the background, dedicated to on the projects.
Right, and you'll also be seeing on the south part in San Miguel County, you'll actually be seeing staff from Tierra y Montes shadowing as well. There's quite a lot of area to assess. We have other programs that are ongoing. So we want to definitely be engaged in that process. So you'll be seeing some of our staff out periodically as well too. Did you want to address the other one, Kenny? Can the team members for each section be put in the chat?
Yeah, and we had them on the slideshow, so they'll know that. But we can put all of the team members in the chat, and we'll get them in there. All three teams in there. I don't know. Do we still have a bad echo?
No.
Somebody said a horrible echo, so I want to make
No,
sure.
I think what happened is both yours and Mr. Alcon's mics were on at the same time.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah,
So we're good.
we
The
have
next-
two sitting in the same room, but we had two computers on just in
Yeah,
case.
yeah, we've had that before.
Yeah.
So the next one is, how can we contact our team leader?
So really the best thing to do is turn in the request for assistance, and the team leader will contact you guys. These team leaders are going to be extremely busy. I mean, we've got them scheduled out already. We've got them scheduled tomorrow. We've got them scheduled the next day. They're meeting with people. They're going to be out there on the ground. They're going to be probably at a cell phone service when they get there. So the best thing to do is submit that request for assistance, and our team leaders will call you. They'll reach out to you. You can call them, but you just got to wait your turn, I guess, so to speak. I hate to put it that way, but be patient. They'll be contacting you. If they start getting inundated with all of these calls, they're going to spend their entire day just taking phone calls, and they can't focus on the work that needs to be done in the ground. So that's why we're really asking folks to submit the request for assistance, and then our team leaders will reach out to you to schedule a site visit.
I think that was really well put, Kenny, because it is, I know even on my end, trying to function normally through my normal job and fielding calls and emails and whatnot with applications has been hard to manage all that. So I think it's best that you just go ahead and fill out that app so that we're not bombarding our team members with phone calls. They can get these assessments done quicker, and I appreciate you mentioning that, Kenny.
Yep.
Okay, so once the landowner submits the request for assistance, the team leader, okay, never mind, I was reading Kenny's answer. So as far as the jurisdictional stuff, Kenny Alcon did a good job of answering those. There's a question on the Doghead fire, the picture that you showed with the rehab, with the greening up and whatnot. How many years after the fire was that?
That was actually the next year that we were able to get out there. So the contour tree felling on the Doghead fire was the next year. We went back out there and we were able to see all of that. The pictures on the U Park fire was about 3 weeks after we did the work.
Right.
So again, just depends on the rains and whatnot.
Okay, so where can we find the EWP request for assistance? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my contact info in the chat in a little while. Once we field all these questions, and you can either call our office directly or request it specifically by email. If you don't have those capabilities, you can come by our office, but I'll put that information in the chat for those folks that are looking for it. I just want to make sure you keep in mind, folks, that anybody in San Miguel County will need to submit an application to Tierra y Montes. Everybody that's in Mora County will have to submit to Western Mora. And I just got an interesting one today, and you're going to see this. There's landowners with property in both counties. So if that's the case, because of the jurisdictional stuff, you're going to need to submit an application to both.
Yep, you're absolutely right, Daryl.
Okay, so how do you value the time of the landowner in terms of cost share?
Okay, so I'll get into a little bit of the weeds here. So if it's a landowner that's not on like a county payroll or Tierra y Montes or a Soil and Water Conservation District payroll, it's just a landowner and they're going to do the work, we'll take the FEMA rate on what they have for a general labor or a foreman or whatnot. And we have that document and we give it to the sponsors. And this is where this information will be provided when we're meeting with the landowners to implement the projects. Right now, we're just planning. But if we get funded and we're going to start implementing, then we would sit down with the landowner and discuss that with them and say, okay, your time is going to be based on the FEMA rates that FEMA has on their docket, and we get that docket over to our sponsors for that. Same thing with equipment that a landowner has that's going to be towards in-kind. It would be based on those FEMA rates. Those FEMA logs have a lot of equipment. You know, they've got 3/4 ton trucks, 1 ton trucks, you know, D9s, D8s. They got the whole list of a lot of the equipment that's in there. So we use that. That's what we use.
All right, thanks for that, Kenny. So the next one is going to be, can an acequia be a sponsor? Answer that first and then we'll go into the rest.
Okay, so yeah, technically the acequia can be the sponsor. But I will tell you, the more sponsors we have, the more paperwork it is, which in turn means the more time that we spend doing paperwork. So with the acequias, we did have this question come up on Friday, and we've had it come up several times. What I recommend for the acequias is to be kind of a co-sponsor and sponsor and maybe take care of that in-kind work for the projects that are going to be completed along your acequia that are going to be done to protect the acequia. And you kind of just do that through you work through the sponsor, and you say, okay, like the next one says Murphy Lake. So if that acequia is up there around Murphy Lake, whatever that acequia is says, they go to that would be in Mora County. So you would go work with Western Mora SWCD and say, okay, for this one, we want to co-sponsor this little area here. We'll take care of the match. We'll take care of any of the in-kind that happens for these projects. That's probably better than us entering into an agreement with every single entity that is eligible to be a sponsor. It's just a lot of paperwork, and it's just going to bog it down. We want to make this as simple and as fast as we can. So that's kind of what I request for acequias. And it might have answered the second question a little bit, Gerald.
I think it did, and really on that one, I think Kenny answered that one already. You know, the key is to submit those requests for assistance so that NRCS can go and do that assessment and help you figure out what can be done out there. So the next question, when the assessment is complete and the project is accepted, who does the design work? Is it NRCS or the sponsor?
NRCS would be responsible for the survey and the design. And that's just part of the assistance that we provide to the community, you know, part of our technical assistance.
All right, the next one, how do we get information about rehab or reseeding assistance? So essentially, this is one of the tools that's out there is the CWP program. Depending on where you live, there might be some other stuff that might come up later, but for the most part, you know, another encouragement to get those applications in so that we can get out there and do the good work that we can. Where to get the forms? Okay, so there was a comment there that the form's not available on the Mora County website, and it says at least it is not easily available. So we'll investigate that and see where else we can post them. So what if you have more than one property? Does a form need to be completed for each property?
The only time that you would need to complete more than one form is if your land is in both Mora and San Miguel County, because of, like we said, the jurisdictional boundaries between the two sponsors. San Miguel County, Tierra and Montes, they cannot cost share on anything or contract anything that is in Mora County because they don't have the jurisdiction there. So if you have 1, 2, 5 properties and they're all scattered throughout San Miguel County, just one request for assistance, but on there, we're going to ask your acres. I don't know if it's on the request form, but when we call to schedule the appointment, generally we're going to ask your acres, please give us that cumulative amount of acreage you have.
Right, and I saw this come up already on our applications. One landowner submitted 3 applications for 3 separate properties in 3 separate communities. So I told her we didn't need all the applications, but what I'm going to recommend to people so that it can help us clarify this, if you have property in Mineral Hill, in Gainas, and then up in San Ignacio, let's say, when it says the name of the community, indicate on there that you have 3 properties in those 3 different communities. The more information we have in terms of scheduling, it'll kind of help us clarify all that. Okay, so the next one is the post-fire assessment request did not have an email on it. The answer to that one is yes. It goes to the same email address as the EWP request. And I'll be talking about that other post-fire assessment request after we're done with our partners. So were the forms we submitted before the meeting, the forms we need to submit to get an assessment? Yes. So any form that you filled out that says EWP on it is specifically for this program. So Ms. Kaplan, those forms that you sent to me are directly for this program. Okay, so Kurt, what I'll do is I'll bring you in after our partners have had a chance to go ahead and do their presentations, to bring in some information about Red Cross. Next question, how about to rebuild a well that NRCS helped with originally for drinkers, for livestock and wildlife?
That one, that we would have to discuss that with the local field office. We've provided guidance. Like I said, I'm the assistant for programs, so I oversee all of the programs in New Mexico. And I've already provided some guidance to our field office on how to work with landowners that had or have an EQIP or a CSP contract, that's an environmental quality incentive or a conservation stewardship contract with us, that had practices installed that got damaged by the fire. There's a couple of pieces it's going to depend on the status, the current status of the contract, if it's active or if it is actually has expired, you know. So for that one, I would recommend that you contact the Mora field office or the Las Vegas NRCS field office, and they can help you with that. Those won't be through EWP.
Okay, so the next one, what about steep slopes above the river on county roads? Who will take care of that?
You know, that's always one of the limiting factors when it comes to our program, those steep slopes. You know, we start getting into 15% and above slopes, and you know, that's kind of something that it's out of our capacity to do. But again, we need to see it. I don't want to make a decision or make a call here from behind the desk in a computer. I would rather have our teams out there on the ground and take a look at it and then go from there.
Right, and there are some areas where it is too steep to safely put humans and machinery in. And it's a really unfortunate circumstance, but there are those situations where it's too dangerous to have people in the area. So, you know, it's all site specific, like Kenny said, and it's best left to them to come and take a look at it. Next, if practices are being done on ranches, how are they going to help buy the equipment needed for mastication? So I'm assuming this one is, this program will not help reimburse ranches or help them purchase any type of equipment. The equipment that would be utilized for EWP would be hired by the sponsor to complete that project that's necessary. So it would actually be contracted, but EWP does not reimburse or address any type of funding that would allow landowners to purchase equipment. So the next one, I've already taken care of that. Same one. Okay, so Chambliss introduced himself on the chat to everyone. Chambliss Latana, thank you for that. And I've reached the end of my questions on the thing there, Kenny. So I thank you for fielding all those. Thank you, folks, for asking the questions that. Oops, I just saw one pop up. Thank you for asking those. You know, we want you folks to make an informed decision, you know, about all of this. So Kenneth went ahead and put in the chat there if you folks are interested, all the team members and things like that. So, but we want you to make an informed decision. And you know, Kenny mentioned earlier, this is definitely a voluntary program. Without you folks submitting those applications to us and asking for help, this can't happen. Without sponsors stepping up to the plate, volunteering to take this on, NRCS can't assist by putting this on the ground. So it takes a collaboration between all of us to make it work. I saw a couple more questions come in. So, okay, so there's something about a nonprofit. Are we eligible for assistance? So a lot of that comes down to who the one that is eligible for the assistance is the person or entity that owns the property. So even if it's leased out or whatever, we're going to work directly with the landowner because that's just the way it works best. So if you folks are are worried about qualifying or anything, just get a hold of us directly and I'll send you an application and we'll get some people out there to take a look at it. I still don't understand where we get the request for assistance in San Miguel. I will be posting that in the chat in just a few minutes. I'm also running the meeting and doing a few other things. So when I multitask, I make a lot of errors. So if you give me a couple minutes while somebody else is presenting, I'll go ahead and put that in there.
So Gerald, we did miss one question. It says, what if there are not enough contractors to do the work? You know, we've talked about that. Like I said, the sponsors have indicated that they want to stay local. If we run out of local contractors, you know, they can go outside. They can go outside of Mora and San Miguel County and hire contractors from other parts of the state or even other states and other EWP events that we've seen. They've brought in, you know, contractors from Colorado have come and done some of the work. You know, so the local contractors, they're going to have the opportunity. Gerald has said this, and Gerald, I'll let you talk on that. But you know, we've had those conversations that we want to keep the work local, but if we run out of contractors, we may not have any choice but to go outside of the counties and get some folks from other counties to come in and do some of the work.
Right. So I'll go ahead and just touch on that since you brought it up earlier too. So as far as the procurement process goes, anything over, you know, $1,500, $5,000 is going to need to be quoted out. Anything above $20,000 has to be put out RFPs or bids. The thing is because of the funding source, because of all the things that are tied with the funding, and us being a state agency, we're only going to be able to engage in contracts with contractors that are bonded and licensed. So if you know people that have been putting that on the back burner to get it done, encourage them to go through that process, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to engage, especially on larger contracts. They need to have that licensing and bonding. So get that word out to them. If they want to participate, make sure they have that. And like Kenny said, you know, if we don't have enough locals, we're going to have to look elsewhere. That's just the reality. This footprint is massive. So 220 days seems like a lot of time, but with the magnitude of what we're up against, that can pass in a blink of an eye, so to speak. So, you know, let's encourage our local contractors to be engaged in the process and also complete the necessary paperwork they got to get done. So, and then there's a comment on there. Thank you for assembling a good team that is familiar with the area. And Kenny, I want you to go ahead and touch on that. There's a very specific reason you selected people from out of district and close by.
Yeah. Thanks, Gerald. Yeah, you know, it's like I said, I grew up in Mora. Kenneth Alcon grew up in Mora. We've got Travis. We've got a lot of local folks that are familiar with the area, and we felt that, you know, it hits a little closer to home for us because we know what we were going through. I had property that burned in the fire, and so, you know, getting that local staff on there with the local knowledge of, you know, this is where this person is and this person lives there, and I think it was just really important to us that we keep that local staff engaged and that we have some folks that live here and understand what they're going through and are going to continue to live here after the fire is gone and everybody's out of here. You know, they're going to continue to be around and still have a stake in the game. And so we wanted to make sure that we keep those local folks involved. And then, you know, working with your local communities, I think there's a little bit of that trust factor there. You know, and we want to gain the trust and the respect of the private landowners, and we know that the local folks have that, and they trust them, and they know and they understand them, because, you know, we're out here to help, and we want to reach as many landowners as we can. And so, you know, that was very important to us when this came on. You know, our state conservationist right away, he knew Kenny and I were from the local area. He says, you guys are going to be out there on the ground, and we were on board with that. You know, and we said, well, these are the folks that we need. They have that special skill set. And so, yeah, we felt that we owed it to the communities to make sure that we have a good, solid team out here, some local folks that know and understand what's going on, understand the way of life, you know, understand the acequias and what those represent and entail. You know, a lot of us irrigated out of acequias. So, you know, that's kind of where we were coming from on our end. It hit a little closer to home for us, and we wanted to make sure that we provide the assistance that these folks in the county need. Thanks, Gerald.
Thank you, sir. So, does NRCS have anything else to put out there, before we move on to our FSA presentation?
Yes, sir, Gerald. That concludes our portion of it. I appreciate the questions and I appreciate the time, and please fill out that form so we can get our staff out there to complete an assessment. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kenny. Now we're gonna go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Linda Alcon from FSA to explain some of the programs that are available to for things that don't qualify for EWP but do qualify through FSA. Go ahead and take it on, Linda.
Okay, there you go. Okay, you mute it. Okay, you're on.
So for those that don't know where my office is located, it's located on 1927 A 7th Street of Las Vegas. My contact information is right there. It's 505-425-3594 extension 2. So the question is going to be how to get started. The first thing you need to do is you need to call my office and make an appointment. And it's very important that you make an appointment because our phones are ringing. We're working with customers. So this way, when you have an appointment with us, we can set that time aside just for you. The reason you need to come into my office, because any programs that you participate with us, you have to have your farm records established. And in order to set those farm records, we need the following documentation. We're going to need copies of deeds, property taxes that show acreage, a map with boundaries. It can also be a Google map or a survey map. And then we're going to need leases. And one more thing we're going to need is the photos of burned property, of the livestock, fences, etc. So we can see what programs we're going to be putting you into. The first program I'm going to talk about is the livestock feed program. The livestock feed program helps those who have suffered grazing losses due to drought during the normal grazing period for the county. The program started January 1st of 2022. You must have owned your livestock 60 days prior to sign up. If you owned them like 30 days, they won't qualify. You'll be eligible up to 5 months of feed, but at 60%. We don't pay 100% of the program. And to get this program, we look at the drought monitor. So it's a livestock feed program is based off the drought monitor. We are categorized in a D4. So basically that's what gives us the 5 months of feed. The second program I'm going to talk about is a livestock indemnity program. For those that lost cattle in the fire, the livestock indemnity program provides benefits to livestock owners who have lost livestock in excess of normal mortality caused by eligible loss of conditions. Conditions include adverse weather, eligible disease, and selling livestock at a reduced price due to injury caused by an eligible loss of condition. You're going to have to prove of death. So you're going to have to bring contemporaneous diaries showing the time of the event, pictures that have dates on them, brand inspection, anything that's other reliable documents. You need to report this within 30 days, whether by person, phone, email, fax. If you have questions on this program, call my office. We'll help you more on phone or bring you in and we can discuss more with you when you come in. These are examples. The next one's going to be the livestock assistance, emergency assistance for livestock, honeybees, farm raised fish program, ELAP. So under ELAP, we have water hauling. The well, the river, ditch, or main source of water must be dried up and pictures will need to be provided for proof. Also ponds, if your pond is dry, that's eligible. Water hauling will be paid only up to 150 days. Keep a water hauling calendar stating how many trips and gallons of water is being hauled. So you can see in the pictures how we have the truck carrying the water, how we see the river dried, and where they're taking the water to. That's basically what we need you to bring in, plus a calendar showing us every time you went out there to take the water. So now I'm going to have Kim, who's going to do the next one.
Another program available under ELAP is going to be the livestock feed transportation program. With this program, we're going to need the normal and abnormal dates and mileage of the truckloads. You'll need to keep your receipts for records showing when you purchased these feeds. The mileage will start once you purchase the feed and it is in your vehicle, trailer, transported to where you will be feeding or saving the feed. The minimum mileage for this program is going to be 26 miles.
So the grass fire for grazing. This one is, say you had 100 acres of land that got burnt in the grass fire. You're going to be eligible for 180 days of grass feed payment for that one. Keep in mind that it's not going to be eligible on federal and state land.
The next program that we have is the Emergency Conservation Program, ECP. This program won't be available until we do the COC meetings to do a sign up dates for the approved disaster during the implementation request. ECP provides emergency funding and technical assistance to farmers and ranchers to rehabilitate farmland and conservation structures damaged by natural disasters. This practice will be ineligible if the practice has already been started before approved by COC. The proper documentation required is going to be photographs of verification. Please save your receipts for any of the purchases and take them to the San Miguel Mora County office in order to get these stamped.
So the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, we put in a request for this program. This is going to be working on the forest land. So forests that got burned and fences that got destroyed. We're trying to get this program implemented in our office. So bear with us. Hopefully we'll be hearing from my state office soon in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be able to let you know about this program. So we're putting your names in your list, on our list, and we know, excuse me, when we map out your property, we're seeing which program you're going to be applying to. So we'll put you on our list and let you know when this program comes. And that's it. If you have any questions.
I was muted and I was trying to tell everybody, sorry about that. So it says, how do we apply for forest restoration, Linda?
So right now we don't have the program yet in my office, but once we do, if the person is on our list, we'll be calling them into our office when the time comes. And then we'll be able to go over it with them at that time.
All right.
So please keep in mind that we requested for the program. We haven't got it yet, but it's coming, hopefully.
Okay, so how do they get on the list? Linda, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, so folks want to know, how do they get on the list?
To get on my list, you need to call my office. Like the beginning of my slideshow, you need to call my office. So that way we can set up your farm records. That's the first thing we want to do, but you'll be in our list as soon as we get this program, then we'll be able to get you on the program itself.
Okay, and Mr. Jason Martin also brought up a good
Once I
point.
know that when we get it.
That the NRCS EWP teams will actually be taking notes in the field for folks that could actually qualify for EFRP or ECP. So that'll be included in the landowner notes. And there's a request to put your phone number in the chat, Linda.
Okay, but keep in mind, even though the NRCS is going out there and doing their work, they still need to contact my office because they need to get on my list.
Right.
Because they need to set up their farm records. Because once these things open up, like for ECP, we're only going to have a 60-day sign up. Period. So that's why it's important to contact my office, because you need to be on that list. That list is very important.
All right, so Kenny went ahead and posted the number on that. It's the lower number. So it's 505-425-3594, extension 2, and that'll take you directly to Miss Linda Alcon. So I don't see any other questions regarding that. So did you have anything else to add, Linda?
Not really, just, people, just like I said, you need to make an appointment. You need to call my office. That's the two main important things that they need to do in order to get into my office and to get on that list.
All righty, thank you. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take a couple of minutes to go ahead and go ahead and introduce a small program that Tierra y Montes also has. It's very similar to what EWP does. We're gonna be offering assistance for, potentially reseeding efforts, installation of wattles, contour felling, things like that. The intent of this is to be able to assist folks that may or may not qualify for EWP because of that imminent threat to life and property. So what I'm encouraging people to do is that whenever they call and request an application for EWP, I'm sending them an application to our internal program too. So we're going to fill those. We're going to fill those applications at the same time, and I'm also going to let you know that right now, for us, the biggest priority is processing these EWP applications, because as you heard, there's folks here from around the state, from NRCS and others that are dedicating their time to get these done. So we want to get them done in the shortest amount of time possible. So we're going to dedicate most of our resources to that first and process what we can internally through there. But I know I had heard the other day that there's potential that some of our monsoon flows may be coming as early as June 20th. So, we're in a situation where we have a limited amount of time, and we're going to do the best that we can to serve the people that we represent. So there's a question in the chat: does Mora County have something similar? And so as far as I know, they don't have a similar program to what we're offering. But the EWP programs and FSA apply across both San Miguel and Mora counties. Okay. But as far as the smaller program that Tierra y Montes is offering, I don't know that Mora does. If anybody from over there has any information regarding that, they can go ahead and pop it in the chat or go ahead and bring it through. So that was just a little teaser on another thing that we have to offer, but our primary focus right now is going to be EWP. And then can the individual from Red Cross go ahead and mute themselves and bring forth the information you have? I don't have your name. I was looking for it in the chat.
That's fine. This is Kurt Cromer. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Red Cross for the Arizona and New Mexico region. And for the purposes of this call, just wanted to update the folks that are on the call about the financial services and the financial assistance that the Red Cross provides. And I'll do this real quickly. Because frankly, we're having difficulty finding folks who we know are eligible for financial assistance and having them come forward to give us the information that we need. So fundamentally, we have financial assistance to individuals whose homes are what we call majorly damaged or destroyed. And there are criteria around what's majorly damaged and destroyed. And we have identified approximately 700 homes in several different counties, but mostly in the counties that we've been talking about here on this call. So 700 homes have been destroyed that we're aware of. And the financial assistance we provide is somewhat based on the size of the family and all of that. But that's going to be going on only through the end of this week, through June 10th. We're going to have another program that's going to provide additional financial assistance, and that'll start up in about 2 or 3 weeks. And so one can get some funds now and one can get some funds later. But the funds that are available now, that runs out on Friday. And the easiest way to find out if you're eligible, we've got addresses that we know where the homes are destroyed, is to call up 1-800-RED-CROSS, and someone will pick up and you'll have a caseworker that'll then work with you through that. And then just a couple of quick things, because there's always these myths out there about the Red Cross. So 1, we're a nonprofit, we're not a government entity. 2, if you get funds from us, you can also get funds from FEMA and vice versa. If you get funds from FEMA, you're still eligible for Red Cross funds. 3, those funds, you do not have to pay them back. They are not a loan. We just simply give you the funds. And then lastly, everybody, for all intents and purposes, if you meet the criteria, are eligible. It doesn't matter what your immigration status is. It doesn't matter anything. We provide assistance to anyone that's eligible. So again, 1-800-RED-CROSS if you believe that your home might be eligible based on major damage and destroyed. And that's my little spiel.
Thank you for that, Kurt. And we definitely appreciate knowing that there is a deadline for some of the funding that you have available now. So all you folks out there that know somebody that's seeking assistance for lost homes and whatnot, make sure you direct them towards Red Cross to be able to kind of help fill that void. Okay, and there's one other thing I'm gonna just touch real quickly on before we go ahead and let everybody go. I received an email earlier today from the incident command team, and I'm sure they posted the form. So those of you folks that had any type of fire line constructed, dozer line, etc., done on your property, fences cut, the whole 9 yards, whatever was done to help suppress the fire, they're really having a hard time getting landowner information and trying to pinpoint the areas that they need to rehab. So they've put together a really quick little form that should be available on that Facebook page that they've been utilizing for information purposes for the duration of the fire. I opened it up today just to look at it. It pops up, you fill it out and you press submit and it goes off to them, and then they'll be in contact with you. So if you know anybody that has had dozer line installed, fences cut, the whole 9 yards for suppression, they are seeking your landowner information to know where they need to go out and start fixing some of these things. So just keep an eye out for that on that Facebook page. And I really want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I know it was a bit of a long meeting. There's a lot of information to put out there, but definitely take the time to fill out those EWP applications and get them to your districts as soon as possible. The sooner we get all these done, the sooner we can move towards funding requests and also implementation, which is the goal, right? We want to get these projects done on the ground, but we need you folks to step forward and volunteer yourselves as the people that we need to assess. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to NRCS for any parting remarks, if they may have any.
No, Gerald, at this time, I think, unless anybody has anything else, like Kenny said, the key thing is if you think you have some kind of resource concern, is to get those request forms in as soon as possible, and that way we can start scheduling appointments for site visits.
Thank you, Kenny. Linda, did you have any parting remarks?
For right now, no, I want to just stress that they need to call my office and get on my list. And then when I sit down with everybody, when they go participate with my programs, I'll sit with them and I'll go through that with them thoroughly.
All righty, well, thank you, folks. And then we did go ahead and record the meeting. I'm working with a couple of different partners to be able to get this this link posted. We're basically gonna be reaching out to the Facebook, to the incident command team with the Facebook. That'd probably be the quickest way to get it out. If they're willing to post it for us, it'll be on there. The Forestry and Watershed Institute at Highlands has offered, New Mexico Acequia Association has also offered. So once we get that in, we'll go ahead and put that out there. There's a question, which group wants to remediate the dozer line? That is actually the incident command team that's been in charge of the fire. So they have a suppression team that will come in and fix some of the dozer line and stuff like that. So it's actually the team that's still on site that is requesting that information. And with that, I'll thank you folks for joining us and our partners for being, willing to spend this time late into the evening to explain the programs they have to offer. And we hope to hear from all of you soon. Thank you.